Hey there, everybody. Welcome to the very first episode, the first proper episode of the RUSTWORKS podcast. That's right, we finally got a name for it. Today's episode, fittingly enough, is going to be about Unbreakable Iron Ranger Episode 1. And today we're going to be going on the process behind that episode, the creation about Unbreakable Iron Ranger a little bit, and just going into some more fun commentary about this. When I do streams, sometimes I want to talk about my works and stuff. And as I said in the episode 0, sometimes it becomes very difficult to get my words formulated about the process behind my art and commentary about like the creation behind certain episodes or characters. So the point of this podcast, as said, is to help be a much more controlled environment where I can actually talk about this stuff. I actually got a bunch of notes here as well written down to go about this whole thing, so that way I'm staying focused on track and I'm not getting distracted by chat. As fun as that is, I want to make sure that I give everybody a comprehensive guide and not me just forgetting about what I was talking about or making things hard to parse through, you know? Anyway, that being said, before we get into the main topic of today, let's go over the briefing. Episode 2 of The Wolf of New Orleans is currently being worked on. I know I've been a little bit behind on that, but I promise it is being worked on. I'm finally getting back to the production of that. Unfortunately, it's still taking a bit for me to get into a good rhythm. I thought I was managing to do better, but unfortunately, it still takes a lot of time to get back into that grind and that cycle when you've been out of it so long and inconsistently doing it. It is being worked on, and it'll be out here soon enough. There's a new mini-comic series that is starring Ben and Frankie called Monster and Bride that's being worked on. I'm going to be releasing it early on Patreon. It's going to be a weekly release. And for the first 4 episodes, it's going to be released on Patreon first. And then they'll be starting to be released everywhere else. So Patreon has a 4-week head start on the comic once it finally starts launching and stuff. I've been wanting to work more on something like this, and I think I know of a way to consistently want to do this and have ideas for it. Whenever I've done like more slice of life, goofier comedy stuff with like Daisy Eternal, or more romantic stuff with like Peter and MJ, when I do Maximum Spider-Man, I enjoy doing those type of genres, but the problem is I never really had those consistent ideas, and when it came to Spider-Man stuff, I always felt like it needed more than just little one-off things, but I didn't want those to be the focus that people came for me for. It's a fine balance, you know? There's a fine balance of wanting to make sure that, like, people are coming to you for your original work versus your fandom work, but your fandom work still brings people in, you know? And I do enjoy my fandom work, but I want people to come in and stay for the original works, more so than anything. But you can't please everybody. You can't get everybody to be into all the original work that you do, but I want to do my best to do that, you know? That doesn't mean that Daisy Eternal and the Maximum Spider-Man stuff are dead. It just means I want to find a better happy medium and such. And with this comic with Monster and Bride, it's meant to be kind of like filling in that gap of being like a cute slice of life comic that people can stay up to date with more consistently and be a better funnel to go into more of my original works. That is the plan. We'll see if it works, but there you go. That's the current situation. Now then, let's start with episode 1 of Unbreakable Iron Ranger on these little episode breakdowns. So, episode 1 was actually based off of this pilot that I made in 2017. And this pilot was basically a culmination of this one iteration of Unbreakable Iron Ranger. Now, I gotta go into a little bit of history here. Before this current iteration of Unbreakable Iron Ranger, I was constantly rebooting and resetting this series so many times over and over and over again. You talk to people who are close to me that have known me for such a long time, they'll tell you I have been at this for a while, and I was in a really bad phase of constantly doing it over again and again, because I had this very deadly perfectionism with Unbreakable Iron Ranger to the point that it almost killed the series. So this is probably one of the biggest pieces of advice I can give people is don't try to reboot everything and make it perfect. Just go ahead and start working on it and get a good feel of it, and you can make it perfect later on. That doesn't mean be sloppy about it. Just know that, like, your best today will be better tomorrow. But the sooner you start, the better. But yeah, the best time to start working on your creations is literally right now. So, But as I said, there were so many different reboots and iterations, but the one that was the most popular and well received was FON Origins. At the time, the series was referred to as Freak of Nature, and FON Origins was meant to be like the starting point that I had, like a little, when I was doing reboots, this was supposed to be like the new iteration, and I was having it be like a little origin story, and then I would continue the story later on from that. But it was the most well-received version, and because of that, I later went on to redo the art of it and tried to parse through, okay, what did people enjoy about this? What did I enjoy working on this iteration? And seeing how it looked with the improved art, and just taking some time to see, okay, does this still work with the refined art? Was the big problem holding this back the art style? Was there any writing issues I had? That was my goal working on that little reboot. And after I was done going through like about like 4 episodes of it, roughly about like 4 episodes, I think 3 to 4 episodes of it, I decided, you know what, I think I know what I need to do. I'm just going to go ahead and just do one more reset on this, and we'll go from there, and that'll be the last one. I say as I make a pilot for it, and then I decide to reset. But there's a little bit more to that. But basically, that pilot that I made in 2017 was meant to be a shortened version of that horror show arc. And like in that arc, Ben was, trying to escape from horror show. However, it was different because characters like Toma, that everybody knows, the tomboy gator gal, was supposed to be in that arc. She was in FON Origins, but she wasn't in episode 1. Same thing with different characters like Dwight. They were supposed to be in there, but then they got pushed back. So that whole arc basically got trimmed down into one episode, essentially. That was the goal. And so because of that, a lot of fat had to be trimmed, and I basically had to just focus down on what was the most important parts of this horror show breakout and why I was trying to do it in the first place. So then I could continue going forward. If I had a solid enough launching point, I would be able to move forward. That was honestly the biggest reason why I kept restarting so much in the first place, is because when I was working on this comic, I was so worried that every introduction I was doing was bad. I kept thinking that like I wasn't doing it right. I thought I was like, it was just a weak opening every time. And then I started worrying about like the direction it was going, like right from the gate. Like I was just worrying about all of these different ripple effects, because I wanted things to be as perfect as possible and have a good impression. But because I kept on resetting and restarting, I almost killed the series, and I never gave people a chance to give the series a chance. So that's important. Like, that's the thing. This was a big project I cared a lot about and I wanted to get right. But because this was like the big project I wanted to do, I shot myself in the foot, because you really, ideally, you don't want to try to do these big projects in the first place. You don't want to do like you don't want to do like a One Piece as your first project. You want to do one shots. You want to do mini comics. You want to get your feet wet. You want to get your tootsies all wet and all that stuff. You want to make sure that you're understanding the medium that you're working with, and working and practicing and getting better at it with all these different mini one-shots that may not matter in the long run, or you might take inspiration from and use that for your main projects. That's what I should have done, but I didn't. But on the other hand, though, because I did these reboots so many times, I gained a lot of experience on making comics and what was the best decisions to make, what was the worst decisions to make, how to go about it, and all that stuff. And that led to the current iteration of Unbreakable Iron Ranger, as the first episode was a much more polished up version of that 2017 pilot. And after that, I felt like I had a good enough, strong enough start that I finally managed to get out of the horror show arc within one episode and moved on from there. Another fun fact about this series with Unbreakable Iron Ranger is that it uses Beowulf, the epic Beowulf, as a baseline, much like how Oh Brother Where Art Thou uses the Odyssey as a baseline. And I did that for a reason, because number one, I liked that epic, I really did. And number two, I already was using it as inspiration for an earlier iteration of Unbreakable Iron Ranger called Mighty Beowulf, which I'll get to a little bit more when I talk about Ben. But because of that, I decided to use it as a way to help focus the story. Because at the time when I was working on this iteration of Unbreakable Iron Ranger, I was more confident in wanting it to be a shorter series, essentially. Something like that would be the equivalent of a 13-episode anime, Something like that. Something short and sweet that people would enjoy, but it felt like it had a solid enough ground. And at the time, I was pretty smart, but I wanted to make sure it stayed short until a certain point. But essentially, I used Beowulf as a baseline because it was a pretty short epic, and I thought, you know what, hey, this would be pretty good just to help keep me focused on what I want the beginning and the end goal to be, essentially. And like I said, it was used in a similar way to how O Brother, Where Art Thou used the story of the Odyssey to tell its story, and basically using that as an inspiration springboard. And when you do comparisons with the movie and Odyssey, you start seeing where they were coming from and what they used as a springboard and stuff. It's not all one-to-one, but they used it as a way to tell the story as like a little fun reinterpretation of the Odyssey, essentially. And that's what I wanted to do with Unbreakable Iron Ranger, is use it as a fun reinterpretation of the Epic of Beowulf and using that as a baseline. Hell, we'll get to episode 4 later on, but just to tell you how much of a baseline this was used, in the original epic, Beowulf actually fought against the sea monsters in the earlier parts of the prose, essentially, of the epic. And so because of that, I decided for episode 4, that's when Ben went toe-to-toe with Barry. And that will just to be part of that early arc to show this is still the beginning of Ben's story, essentially, and showing how he's starting to gain more combat experience and starting to get more strength. But we'll get to that when we get to that. But essentially, it was used as a baseline for the story. Now that we started talking about the baseline stuff, why don't we talk about the characters that's based off of Beowulf himself, Ben Young. Ben has been a character that I've wanted to use for such a long time. He's always been this protagonist character that, despite the different iterations that he's taken, even before Freak of Nature, before Unbreakable Iron Ranger, before Mighty Beowulf, I've always wanted to use him in some regard. Originally, he was a full-on robot at one point, and then he became a wizard, and then he became a vagabond who could regenerate, and then he became this alternate take on Beowulf for an original fantasy world, and then finally becoming the Ben that we know and love, this regenerative cyborg character. Now, here's the fun thing. When he was a vagabond that could regenerate, I wanted him to be very nonchalant about his regenerative powers. I didn't want him to be this character that was like kind of like insane and edgy, kind of like Deadpool was with how he reacted to his body parts and stuff. It was more just like he's used to it and he can live with it, but he's not like this but he's also not like a character like Wolverine who's like gruff and mean. He's just like this young dude who's hapless, but at the same time, it's just he's used to the fact that his body can regenerate and that he takes so much damage on a daily. Like, he would basically use his whole body for different things. Like, he would use his own intestines as rope. He would use his own arm as a bludgeoning tool. In fact, there was this little fun gag that I had where basically, if he built up enough blood pressure around his wrist, he would actually send his fist flying off like a rocket punch. It was a lot more creative with how the regeneration was used, and admittedly more gory. But that was the idea, was that you had this regenerative hobo character that was very nonchalant about his powers and was just so used to his body doing these weird things. In fact, that's where Freak of Nature came from, was because Ben was a lot more a freak of nature at one point because of how his body regenerated and the fact that he was a fully organic human and not a cyborg, and basically was just using his body and regeneration to very odd means. It was a lot more based on that. But then eventually, it was actually pretty soon after, I wanted to do my own version of Beowulf, and this is where I started using Beowulf as a baseline with a series called Mighty Beowulf, because I wanted to make a more like a alternate universe, an original universe, just so I could do whatever I wanted to. And Ben, who was this hobo character at the time, ended up becoming this Beowulf, who was basically based off the original Beowulf character from the epic, but instead as a younger teen that was traveling this like fantasy world, essentially, and was going to go fight Grendel because of what he did to his hometown, essentially. And that was the plot point for that, was basically that young boy that wants to go fight Grendel, essentially. But then it returned to the whole regenerative hobo arc, where basically Ben was taken in to be a weapon of war because of his regenerative abilities, and that stuck around. Whereas Ben in FO1 Origins was a much more naive character, partly due to his amnesiac character arc, because he started off having no memories of his past and such. He was trying to figure himself out and trying to figure out his origins because of the amnesia. But he was a lot more of a naive and very I guess golden retriever kind of character and stuff. Not that Ben doesn't have those tendencies, but he was a lot more of a naive and very happy-go-lucky character. Here, Ben is still pretty naive and good-hearted, but he does have a little bit more of that somber chip on his shoulder nature, but he doesn't throw it onto other people. For him, he's wanting to do the right thing. He feels like he owes it to his grandpa. So that's where the differences ultimately are, is you have this very like whimsical, naive young boy. Well, not young boy, he was basically 18 in Ethelwyn Origins. So he was basically like about to go into adulthood, but was still very naive and kind of kiddish. But an amnesiac who basically was just saw the world through a positive lens. And while Ben here does have a more positive view in the world and sees the good in everyone, he still has a little bit of that chip on his shoulder and feels like he owes it to people. He feels like he owes it to use his powers for good. He has a lot more of a burden that he kind of put on himself, essentially. Whereas Freak, Ben's original persona, Ben's original character, was basically just trying to figure out who he was, but just happened to be more of a good-hearted character. As for character inspirations, Ben was based off of a few things. I already mentioned Beowulf, but the origins for why I love the Beowulf epic so much actually come from Skullgirls, because Beowulf was one of my mains in that game, and I freaking loved Beowulf as a character and as a fighter, honestly. I freaking loved him. And that led me to getting really engrossed in the original epic and learning about that. Also, kind of being a bit disappointed about the CGI Beowulf movie, the guy that was made by the same people who did Polar Express. I can't remember the director. I used to be able to say his name at the top of my head. I feel bad, but just that motion capture CGI Beowulf movie. Just for me, I was just kind of like, this is trying way too hard to be edgy, man. At least in my opinion. I was just like, oh my god, this is okay. Anyway, that's just my opinion on that. But as for other character inspirations, Ben was based heavily off of Vash the Stampede. I freaking love 90s anime, and Trigun is one of them. Like, I think everybody that loves 90s anime fucking loves Trigun or Cowboy Bebop. But yeah, Vash the Stampede was used as a inspiration point for Ben's character, especially for when I was doing Unbreakable Iron Ranger. He was basically used as a template to create Ben, and you could see not only the visual similarities, but the character similarities too. This character that's able to regenerate and throws himself into danger trying to do the right thing because he feels burdened to do so. He feels like he owes it to somebody to make the world a better place, to do the right thing, essentially, to protect others and stuff. But Vash is all about trying to preserve peace as best he can and trying to be a pacifist through and through. Ben, though, is just trying to keep the peace as well and try to make peace. But for him, he's just wanting to keep the world safe from those like horror show. But both characters see the world in a very black and white perspective and end up seeing more of the nuance in the gray. And it's a story about trying to stick to your morals and ideals as the world around you changes, and you see how hard it is to try to stick to the narrow path as best you can, But the characters that inspired Ben would be Edward Elric. Like the way that Ben's cybernetics work are 100% based off of the automail from Fullmetal Alchemist. In fact, Fullmetal Alchemist was like the first manga I read all the way through. It's one of my favorites still to this day. But the automail was used as a huge inspiration for the way that Ben's cybernetics work, essentially. The way that the parts are designed, the way that they connect to the nervous system, but the internals of them. I know I don't draw the internals of them a whole lot, but like I had a lot more thought put into them, and I don't show everything, It's like how like in the beginning of Gurren Lagann when they were like studying how to like create this underground society, and they put in all this research, all of this effort, and then after the first episode they barely did any of that. They basically were just one and done for one episode. They did all this research, and then they just, okay, we're out of the underground, we're going to the surface now. Okay. It's kind of like that. Unfortunately, when you're creating stuff, sometimes you learn a lot about one subject, only just to never use it more than once, Oh man, the joys of creation. But anyway, another character that was used for Ben as a template would be Ash Williams. I freaking love the Evil Dead movies, the original Raimi trilogy specifically. I will preface this: I'm not a big horror guy. Not that I don't like certain horror franchises and stuff, but like, don't think that I constantly consume this stuff. For me, I'm more of like a fan of like thriller type of movies, like thriller and slasher movies, than I am a lot more of the horror type of stuff. And I do apologize because I know that there's like a lot. There's times I'm able to people have said I've done good horror, especially like with that first episode of The Wolf of New Orleans. But I'm scared shitless with all the horror media. I'll be real. But yeah, I was just horror stuff really freaked me out. And like I would watch horror Let's Plays and stuff with like Markiplier, and I just got so jittery. I was scared of all the jump scares. I was a bitch. I still kind of am a little bit. Still am a little bit. But I freaking love the Evil Dead movies, and I just love Ash's character. And I freaking love Army of Darkness. That's my favorite of the bunch of that original trilogy. It was so freaking good. I love the use of like combining the camp and the action and the horror of it. It's such a beautiful blend, and I used that as an inspiration for Unbreakable Iron Ranger for that kind of tone that I wanted to go for. I don't know if I always succeeded at that, but that was one of the bits of tone I wanted to go for. And Ash as a character I used for Ben, just having like this hapless hero that just gets himself into these ridiculous situations, is just trying to just keep himself alive for the most part. Even though Ben's trying to do the right thing, he's also just like getting thrown into shit after shit, and he's just like, what the hell did I do? Just that kind of situation. And again, another character with cybernetics and stuff, the list continues. Continue on with the Evil Dead references. In the end of episode 1, that whole sequence of Ben creating new plating for his robotic arms and stuff and rebuilding them essentially was taken from how Raimi shot the scenes of Ash Williams building up his prosthetic arm and both the Evil Dead 2 and Army of Darkness. But yeah, the way that I had the paneling, like in my mind, the way that everything would have been shot, like if it was animated, turned into a live action movie, I would want that to be done the exact same way as it was done in Evil Dead 2 and Army of Darkness. Just the quiet shots of like zooming in as parts are being worked on, and then the final reveal, just like, oh man, I freaking loved it. Anyway, a couple other characters that inspired Ben would be like Cyborg 009, Joe, from the series Cyborg 009, and also Mega Man. Mega Man was one of my favorite series growing up, man. Oh my goodness. And you could definitely tell with early Unbreakable Iron Ranger with the dynamics between like Ben, Dr. Fleetwood, and Dr. Styx being like Mega Man, Dr. Light, and Dr. Wily, respectively. And to cut spoiling it now, Dr. Fleetwood and Dr. Styx are based off of Dr. Light and Dr. Wily. That's why for the main inspirations for Ben. There's stuff that I ended up interjecting him with later on, but that does it for the character inspirations. Now it's time for one of my favorite parts, the music inspirations for Ben. Now, this is another thing. Unbreakable Iron Ranger, much like Guilty Gear and JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, uses music as reference points and methods to help create the characters. There's a lot of music references within the characters and music being used to create the characters. For Ben's full name, Ben Young, was actually taken from several artists that I enjoy. Neil Young, Jonathan Young, my freaking goat, and Dennis DeYoung. It's funny enough, Dennis DeYoung pretty much is the closest to Ben Young, honestly. It's really funny, honestly. But it's mainly was Jonathan Young and Neil Young that ended up being the things that solidified Ben's name being Ben Young. Because Ben always had the name Ben in early Freak of Nature, but originally his full name was going to be Benjamin Hamilton. And the reason why is because I was, admittedly, I was really into Hamilton at the time. I was a theater kid. Yeah. Boy. But then I decided to change his last name because it didn't roll off the tongue, like going Ben Hamilton. It just didn't really roll off the tongue as well. And it didn't sound, and I wanted it to sound a little, this sounds like kind of like Beowulf, or at least have like the same sort of like thing, like the little pronunciation, because like Beowulf, Ben Young, but Ben Hamilton, that's way too many syllables. I wanted something that was a little bit closer to the syllables of Beowulf, and Ben Young ended up being like that. Otherwise, it would have been Ben Hamill, and that just was like, that's weird. But Jonathan Young really solidified it, because while I love Neil Young, and the song Heart of Gold was used as an inspiration for Ben's character, Jonathan Young really was the big inspiration for that. And I remember discovering him when he first released the cover of the One Punch Man's first opening, and like I was hooked ever since. Like, dude, Jonathan is still one of my favorite artists to this day. If I ever got an Unbreakable Iron Ranger anime, I need Jonathan Young to do the opening. I don't care how I do it, how that happens, but I want to get Jonathan Young involved. He's one of my favorite artists of all time. I was listening to this dude when I was like in late high school, early college, man. He was one of my favorites. He still is. I listen to stuff all the time on Spotify. But yeah, as for other music inspiration, Marty Robbins' song Continuing on with the music influences, Big Iron by Marty Robbins was also used to help create Ben. The song itself basically just being about this Lone Ranger going out there and like going up against this big bad bandit, essentially was pretty fitting for Ben's character, essentially. Yeah, in fact, Ben's outfit is slightly inspired by Marty Robbins' outfit in the Gunfighter Ballads album that the song originates from. Although it is a lot more of a mix between like Ash Williams and Marty Robbins. But essentially, that's where the whole basis of the current outfit that Ben wears comes from. It's basically a mix of Marty Robbins and Ash Williams, essentially. Now, another music reference for Ben is DC Talk, and you probably recognize the name by seeing it on Ben's shirt early on, and also on the belt buckle that Ben wears nowadays. But DC Talk, it was one of the Christian bands I listened to growing up, and they were one of my favorites. And the name literally stands for Decent Christian Talk. It's kind of funny. Ben's a good Christian boy, and it literally just goes around wearing something that basically means DC. That basically means please talk decently. Essentially, be a good boy. But it fits Ben really well, and it more than you think, because early on, DC Talk was, I'll admit, pretty corny and cheesy. It was trying to be like Christian hip-hop and such, but it evolved and tried to be more than just what was expected and thought of Christian music at the time, and like the genres that they pushed into, the way that they were trying to do music videos. They may have started off corny and like a little bit awkward, but they grew into their own and wanted to do more than what was expected of Christian music at the time. It was really cool. And so for Ben, it fit perfectly because Ben started off as this very awkward kind of fellow that wanted to do the right thing essentially, but then grew and matured into the hero character that he is now, and is now for the Wolf of New Orleans more of this mentor character for Ruger. And that's how I wanted the direction to go for Ben, is to mature and blossom into more this Western legend type of figure, like someone that starts off just like hapless but wanting to do the right thing, and it grows and matures and becomes the hero that is able to save the day. Like, you know what I mean? That type of thing. On to the next character, Dr. Fleetwood. Dr. Fleetwood's a very interesting case because like he was originally just meant to fill a role. He never existed in Freak of Nature Origins at all. But the reason why I created him was because Ben needed some kind of like ally in the prison, and I didn't want to use Toma or Dwight. I wanted to use them for stuff later on, but Ben was kind of lacking some allies and stuff, and wanted there to be somebody that was able to help Ben get out of there, and that's where Dr. Fleetwood came from. Dr. Fleetwood, if it wasn't obvious, his namesake comes from the band Fleetwood Mac. As I said earlier, Dr. Fleetwood is based off of Dr. Light from the Mega Man series, and so in that whole dynamic, Dr. Fleetwood is based off of Dr. Light, and Ben is Mega Man essentially. But also, yeah, honestly, the song "The Message from Dr. Light" by the Megas was also kind of a bit of a song that was stuck in my head when working on stuff. Staying with the Proto Men, "The Will of One," that was another song that was stuck in my head creating this stuff. There's a lot of music that's just stuck in here that I'm only just now remembering and popping up into my head. But yeah, big Mega Man nerd. But like I said, Fleetwood was meant to fill in a gap essentially, and he was meant to be there originally just to be like this good guy scientist that was just there to help Ben out essentially. But then it later evolved as after I worked on the pilot and I wanted to redo it, I was like, okay, but what if I gave him a bit more of a reason to help out Ben? And I was still flip-flopping on it until the end of the episode when I decided, you know what, there we go. He is Ben's grandpa, because I wanted there to be a bit more like of a deeper connection and also a bit more tragedy with what happens, instead of it being just like, oh, this random good doctor helps Ben escape, and like that's cool, but at the same time I wanted there to be a little bit more tragedy in this whole thing, and also allow for more questions to rise, because instead of it being this random doctor guy that worked with Horror Show, it's instead, wait a minute, Ben's grandpa had ties to Horror Show, or did Styx know him back in the day? Well, what's the connection here? It provides good questions and such. I want to get into that later on a little bit as we continue on. On to Dr. Styx. Now, Styx was actually in FON Origins, but he wasn't the main villain. Styx was meant to be more of a big bad guy figure, but not the main villain or like the major arc villain. He was meant to be like a big threat that the gang would have to take out, but he wasn't planned to be like the main villain like he was planned to be in Unbreakable Iron Ranger. But I liked the character. I wanted to do more with him, and then that just kind of led one thing to another, and Styx ended up becoming instead the head of Horror Show, instead of a scientist that was a part of Horror Show, essentially. Now, Styx is entirely based off of the band Styx, one of my favorite bands. Like songs like Heavy Metal Poisoning and Mr. Roboto are used. Boat on the River. Also, that's another thing. Probably the only song that people know about Styx for is probably Mr. Roboto and maybe Don't Let It End, I think. But yeah, it's mainly Mr. Roboto. Another fun fact, that album that Mr. Roboto is from was actually meant to be this conceptual album that was kind of meant to be like this album that was about like this fascist government that was like outlawing rock, and it was about like keeping rock and roll alive. But also, it's just really funny though. Like the band, ironically enough, split up after the album was made because of creative differences. And quite frankly, the band themselves versus Dennis DeYoung, the band wasn't really happy performing Mr. Roboto. It kind of grew out of their control essentially. But Dennis DeYoung was still wanting to perform the song, but the band Styx, they really weren't wanting to play it at like performances and stuff. It's really funny. I can't blame them necessarily because it kind of makes them seem like they were a completely different band from what they actually were. It sounds like a pretty novelty song. It sounds like a novelty song more than anything. It doesn't really sound like like what Styx actually does. Like you listen to some of Styx's other music, like Blue Collar Man, Boat on a River, Miss America, Renegade. But you'll listen to these songs, or Crystal Ball, like they do some amazing music. I freaking love Styx songs. I freaking love Styx music. But it's so funny because you look at Mr. Roboto, it's completely different from the rest of their music. And it was meant to be the introductory piece to the character of Kilroy in the album Kilroy Was Here. It wasn't meant to be like their usual style of song. It was meant to be it's meant to be an introductory song to the character in the beginning of the album, but it wasn't their usual brand of flavor, you know? But anyway, other songs that we used for Styx were 21st Century Schizoid Man by King Crimson. That's another, like that, you'll find that out later on, but I'll go ahead and say that for now. Oh, I completely forgot to talk about the character inspirations. I think it's because I just already talked about like Styx was based off of Dr. Wily, but he was also based off of Dr. Nefarious. In fact, early on, Dr. Styx had more of this like pointed head. Like the reason why he was bald was literally because I wanted to make his head look more like Dr. Nefarious. And his little the fun fact, his tie that he wears is actually a combo of Dr. Wily's ties that he would wear in the Mega Man Megamix volumes and Gigamix volumes. Oh my god, those were peak. Dude, Wily was fucking stunting on everybody with the, oh my god, dude, Wily looked so freaking cool when he had on the shades and the tie. The dude was just, oh my god. And then he was also like a goofball on the flip of a dime, you know. But also how in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, characters will have like their names sometimes imprinted onto their clothing or like different words and catchphrases. I did the same thing for Styx, basically just having like STYX and then a skull at the end. Now on to the character Ironworks. Ironworks actually has changed a lot. Much like Ben, he went through a different evolution of his own, but at one point he was a cyborg like Ben. He was a human and was turned into a modified cyborg type of character, and very similar to Bane, used nightmare fuel, which is a substance in the series of Unbreakable Iron Ranger, to power himself up, kind of like how Bane used venom to power up his body. But then that changed because I wanted to try to do more, because I literally just gave him the name Ironworks because he had metal parts, but it didn't really relate to his power set too much. I was just like, that's a cool name. I like that name. But then I decided to give the name more of like a meaning as to why he had that name. I wanted to change him to make the name make more sense. I don't know. I don't think this is the best way of creating a character, maybe. I don't know. But then I decided to change him up, make him more of this automaton character. But first I wanted to try to do like this character that became more of a machine type of character. But then eventually he just became a full-on automaton. Although the brain and the eye were remnants of when he was a human that basically was just turned into a robot, essentially. Kind of similar to like the Cybermen from Doctor Who. There's probably a lot of people that thought that like he actually was a human at some point though, but those are just kind of remnants of that old character idea. Whoops. But the reason why he has the one eye is actually because of this strange place, but because of Castle Crashers. So the Cyclops boss that you fight during like the whole the wedding that you crash in the game, haha, hee. But the Cyclops character that was actually used as the basis for this current Ironworks design. Funnily enough, But there was also some other concepts of like a different character that I had called Tauros. That was basically like this mechanical humanoid that was based partially off of a bull. And he was kind of like this bull demon. He had a flowing mane of fiery hair that then just turned to black for this. I don't know. Like I said, it was just basically a lot more like a rule of cool type of stuff, and using from like older inspirations for the character and taken from Castle Crashers. A fun fact as well: the human version of Ironworks that was a cyborg did not have as long of a mane of hair that he does now. It was kind of shorter. It was more akin to like a slight mullet, if anything. It's funny. But also the brain on like the little brain in a dome, like but like the little glass dome protecting his brain. That was actually inspired by from Dr. Let's Shake from No More Heroes 2. Like that's actually where the inspiration came from, was like the little brain and a glass dome protective type of thing. Although there's other stuff that I watched when I was a kid that like had characters with that kind of thing, but really that it was Dr. Let's Shake that basically was the main inspiration for Ironworks having that kind of like dome head type of thing. Fun fact as well, that's actually where like Ironworks is articulate like the way that he articulates his word and talks came from Dr. Let's Shake, because he does a very similar like typing type of thing and using like do you remember me question mark and doing that kind of like it's like there's a couple of the characters that were used as inspirations for Ironworks that unfortunately I cannot talk about right now at the moment. Those will be talked about at a later date. But for now, why don't we get into some of the trivia of the episode? Why don't we get to that? So a couple of fun things. Ben was originally supposed to be on more even standing with Ironworks. Originally, it was supposed to be that Ben was able to be toe-to-toe with Ironworks, but when I was working on the polished up episode 1, I was like, no, this doesn't really work, because it doesn't give a whole lot of like tension or like making the situation dire. So I instead made it so that way that once Ironworks pops on the scene, you know immediately, oh my god, this guy's a big deal. And having Ben and Fleetwood realize, okay, this dude, we can't win against this. We have to survive basically as long as we can. Basically shows that while Ben is scared of Ironworks, he's willing to protect his grandfather above all else against this thing. It shows Ben's courage, even if he knows he's not strong enough to actually take down Ironworks. He's willing to stand up against him, even if he doesn't have a winning chance necessarily. Instead of that whole like, oh, Ben's able to go on even toe with Ironworks and is able to like pull out his gun, shoot him, that type of thing. Ben didn't win in the pilot. I don't want to make that clear. That wasn't like, but Ben didn't win that fight in the pilot, but it was still a bit too even, you know what I mean? Like even Steve in terms of like how they were doing that fight and in that bout. And I wanted it to be different. Like Ben was getting his shit wrecked, so you could see the scale of power that Ben has to get to, you know, like in Mega Man X, where like X gets his shit rocked by Vile and then gets saved by Zero. It basically shows you in the game, like gives you motivation. Like you see how fucking cool Zero is, and you see how strong he is, and you see how Vile basically whooped you into next week, and you want to be stronger than Vile. And so it gives you a motive to want to keep playing the game, because you want to be strong enough to take on that guy and be as cool as the dude that helped save you. You want to get stronger. You have two reasons to do that. And I wanted to do something similar for this, and that's why I decided to change it up. And I think that leads to Ben being a more relatable character, as being more of an underdog, because you see him get his shit rocked, but he still gets back on his feet and still continues to fight and wants to get better. He wants to get stronger. He wants to be strong enough to fulfill his promise to his grandpa. That's the double promise, the double motivation. He wants to be able to fulfill his grandpa's legacy, and he wants to be able to be strong enough to take on Ironworks and prevent him from hurting anybody else. So, you know, theming. Anyway, there's also in that pilot, Fleetwood had this rifle instead of a pair of revolvers, and I will mention in that pilot the weapons. Oh my god, the firearms were a lot more like being as generous to myself and being as kind to myself were more toku toy looking. They looked more like stuff you would see out of Power Rangers and not like actual firearms. But that was because I really like that kind of aesthetic for like weapons and stuff and firearms. I like that more futuristic sci-fi type of thing. Partly because of Zurel, because of his characters as Shrikes and BB. So a fun fact, by the way, Ben actually, I forgot to mention this earlier, goodness, but Ben was honestly, his appearance was based off of Shrike to an extent. Like the coat that he had. At one point, Ben had this metal collar. He also had like these two like pistols that were based off of Shrike's pistols. Then he even had like the bolts and such on them to look more mechanical. I freaking love Zor-El's work, and I was obsessed with his OCT stuff back in the day, especially like with Spoiler and Black Ace, watching like Shrike and Beebs and like the tournament stuff. Oh man, it was so cool. And dude, I freaking love Monkey Wrench. But like I freaked out, like I literally fucking like freaked out like a little nerd seeing like Black Ace and Spoiler being referenced in that Monkey Wrench pile. I was like, woo! I was like, also, dude, I don't want to spoil episode. I don't want to spoil episode 5, but like, I freaked out seeing who he brought back. Oh my god! Anyway, I'm not gonna. I don't. Oh my god, I'm gonna be spoiling so much stuff. Man, but yeah, Ben was based a lot off of Shrike from those early days of when Shrike was an OCT type of character, or more used in OCTs, I should say. But yeah, so the firearms are more kind of sci-fi, kind of toy looking. Whoops. Before I decided to give Fleetwood a pair of revolvers instead. And honestly, the revolver theme fits way more with Ben and Fleetwood. It feels a lot more like Texas Ranger and stuff. And also adds more to the, I forgot to mention, Sam Elliott vibe of Fleetwood. Sam Elliott was another thing that I used to inspire Fleetwood. I think that's kind of obvious, but you know. So the name of the episode, The Chain, was actually the same name for that pilot. It was a song. It's the song by Fleetwood Mac. And I'll be honest, Guardians of the Galaxy 2 really got me sold on wanting to do more music references, especially because of like listening to The Chain. That song was really cool. That's just such a good song. But while that song was talking about like an estranged love between two lovers, I hear it's basically was kind of like inspired basically like this bond between grandfather and grandson and trying to keep together, not because they are falling out of love, but because of the situation they've been put into and trying to keep that bond going, trying to keep that legacy going, essentially. So it's kind of funny how that's used. Also, for continuing on with the music references, the facility was originally called Horror Show Facility Number 9 and was in reference to the song Ride in Cell Block Number 9. Also, on that note, specifically the version by the Blues Brothers. Also, I freaking love the Blues Brothers. It's another one of my favorite movies. Anyway, that was also used as an episode name in FON Origins. But because of later on decisions I made, I decided to go back and change it to just be Horror Show Facility instead of Horror Show Facility Number 9, because I was kind of like, I don't know if I really want Horror Show to be like this big widespread facility anymore. Like I originally had plans where like they were this big evil underground evil organization, and I decided to make it more just like this smaller organization headed by this one mad scientist instead. Originally, this episode ended with Fleetwood surviving and Ben knowing he was captured. I decided to change it because I was kind of like, there's not really a reason for Ben to not go back and try to save his grandpa. And I decided to do this to give Ben more motivation to press on and press forward. And this also leads to something I was set up to talk about here, but like, I was trying to when I was talking about like making a good pilot, making a good first impression, a first good episode, you want to make sure there's a reason, you want to make sure there's like sympathy for the character and understanding, but also you want to make sure the story's engaging, because like if the story, here's the thing, storytelling is a bit of a game, and the game is essentially keeping people's suspension of disbelief staying strong. And so you can tell a story like with the most basic beats, but if they're not emotionally enraptured with the story, it's not going to work. Much in the same way, if you rely too much on emotional storytelling and the logistics don't work, it's going to fall apart if you're not careful. It's a fine balance. I could tell you the story basically like, oh, well, you see, I lost my pen this one day, and I was really upset that I lost this pen, but everybody else probably could be like, okay, why are you upset that you lost this? But then I have to explain, well, the pen, it was really important to me because it was given to me by my grandmother. And now people are like, oh, I'm so sorry about that, dude. And the same with storytelling. You got to add more reason. You got to add a little bit more of an emotional connection, because if we just say this experiment escaped this evil facility. Oh, that's cool. But what did the facility do? What made them evil? What was this experiment stuff? And then you got to start explaining. You got to start explaining what the facility is doing, why they're considered evil, what this experiment is like. Are they a good guy themselves? Are they a bad guy? You got to start adding in more details to make the story interesting. And in much the same way, if Ben escaped but Fleetwood was still there, it kind of makes it so that Ben's always want to go back to it, but I want the story to progress forward more so. Like, give it a bit more of a dire setting. He basically lost his grandfather and basically knows that he has to get stronger because he was only able to escape thanks to his grandfather seemingly sacrificing himself to give him a chance to move forward, to be like live a better life and to fulfill what they were trying to do, which is protecting the cryptid world from people and organizations like Horror Show and Dr. Styx. And if that group was still around, well, then that would be Ben feeling like, well, what if I go back to do this? It wouldn't give him a reason to try to like keep pushing forward with his journey. Even though his grandpa still is captured, Ben's character in my mind was like, oh, he would definitely try to find a way to go back there and free his grandpa. That's Ben's character in my mind. So I was like, no, the best way to get this going is Ben has to keep moving forward. And at the time, he's got to think that like his grandpa sacrificed himself and that horror show is done for until something happens. I'm going to talk about when we get to that. But yes, I wanted to make sure that there was a little bit more of like an emotional weight there that kept you hooked because like you see this boy go through so much, and it also adds on to Ben's character, which is his character that keeps moving forward, that perseveres, that gets back up on his feet. Even though tragedy happens, he's able to move forward and walk forward stead on. That's what I wanted Ben's character to be. And it wouldn't have been as strong if it was just, oh, Fleetwood got captured, essentially. I wanted there to be more of like an emotional turmoil that happened. Ended on a bit of a bittersweet end where like, oh my gosh, Ben's been through a lot, but like he's still willing to keep going. And it endears people to want to follow Ben and continue to fulfill his promise to his late grandpa, which is to protect the world from those like Horror Show and Dr. Styx. So I felt like that was ended on a bit more of an emotional connective note, essentially. Well, that was a lot of like trivia given out there. Hopefully I was able to explain it in a way that that made sense. Hopefully so. All right, I've done a lot of yapping today about episode 1. Now that we're done with that, why don't we go ahead and get into the question section? The section is pretty self-explanatory, but here I answer questions given to me by people on social media, on the Patreon, and everywhere essentially that they want me to answer on the podcast. You can ask these questions wherever. I'm going to make posts dedicated to like saying, hey, if you want to have me answer your questions on the podcast, ask me here and such. And so here is this week's questions I'm going to be answering. From Roger, question, when it comes to designing characters, whether for comics or just for recreation, what is the process you got more used to and why? As I stated earlier, I use music for a lot of my character backgrounds and like creating the characters and creating just creating the characters themselves. I'm sorry, I got tongue-tied there. But basically, I use music as a foundation for characters a lot of the time, or just find fun ways to sneak in music references wherever I can, because I'm just like that. JoJo and Guilty Gear had such a death grip on me in that regard and how they use music to create their characters, essentially. But as well, like there was an early process where like characters were just kind of loosely based off of music. At one point, Ben and like characters like Toma were very like I just gave them songs they were to base them off of, but it was kind of loosey-goosey. And there's some characters that just had names that were taken from random bands and songs that I was just thinking about and I liked, but it was just more like, well, yeah, I like this song. I decided to use it for that character. It was very much the same way that like how early on you had characters like in JoJo Part 2, where the Pillamen, they were literally just named after the Cars, AC/DC, and Wham, and literally just spelled with the original English at the time before we got the translations where they were just named Cars with a K, AC/DC, and Wamu. But then later on in JoJo, Araki got a lot more creative with how he used the music references to create these characters, like with Yoshikage Kira's Killer Queen. Killer Queen is literally just one big walking queen reference. Like even the song itself, Killer Queen, depicts this very mysterious, elegant lady that's always trying to like keep to herself to the point that like she never stays at the same address. Similar to that of Yoshikage Kira, who's trying to live a quiet life, leave no evidence behind. Also, of course, gunpowder, guillotine, dynamite with a laser beam, guaranteed to blow your mind. But also, like, the song is what another one bites the dust. That song is very similar to like Mac the Knife, where it's like you listen to the lyrics and you're like, oh my god, this is kind of a fucked up song. Same thing with like pumped up kicks. You're like, all the other kids with the pumped up kicks better run, outrun my gun. It's a very fucked up song. But yeah, it's just very similar in that regard, just like, oh man, this is fucked. But like the song itself is about a man that just goes on a killing spree out of desperation and on on his last, on like his last, like a last resort type of thing. And it fits so well with Kira's character because like Bites the Dust basically comes out as a power for him to be a get out of jail free card whenever Jotaro comes onto the scene. It's a way for him to restart time in a last desperate move for a serial killer to like stay out of the limelight. It's so cool how Araki evolved and started using music references much more cognitively and actually using them much more as a basis for the character and their personalities and their abilities and their story arcs. But yeah, music is always has been a big part of my life, and I wanted to use it more because of JoJo and Guilty Gear, and so it's always been one of the methods I've used to create my characters. Essentially, there's other different methods, like when it comes to Unbreakable Iron Ranger, trying to combine different cryptids and mutants and like mythologies and things like that with certain Wild West tropes or certain other tropes. Like in the Wolf of New Orleans, there's a lot of creatures that are based more off of like these of Looney Tunes, like Western cartoons and such, because I wanted these more magical characters that came from like more magic and that type of thing, like those origins, to look a lot more fantastical than the more biological creations within Unbreakable Iron Ranger. That I wanted to make that a little bit more of a difference, where like because a lot of the characters and the villains in the Wolf of New Orleans had more magical origins, I decided to make them look more fantastical, like Western cartoons and stuff, to give them more of that like unnatural, like they're not like they don't follow logic, like the logic that we know of because of the magic origins of them, essentially. Lunarberg, question. If you had the opportunity to talk with your past self in the beginning of making Unbreakable Iron Ranger or just art in general, what advice would you give yourself? The first thing I would say is something I said earlier, which is work more on one-shots. Don't try to do this big project from the beginning, and if you do, by God, just do it. Don't try to like redo everything in the beginning. Just do it. Just do it. Just do it. Also, keep it short. Do not flip-flop. I was flip-flopping so hard on if I wanted to do it to be a long-form series or a short-form series later on when I was working on the comic. And that, oh man, we'll get to that when we get to that. But I would have told myself, keep it short. You had it right from the beginning. Keep it short. Other than that, I would say to myself, keep going though, dude. Things will be fine. Because I know that like where I was younger when I was starting off, I was slowly entering a very depressing phase of my life. When I was in high school and then going to college, and then leaving college, I was like I was slowly entering a very dark place. Nothing bad happened, like physical harm, but I was just entering a very depressive place and just kind of like hiding away from people and just slowly but surely just being in a dark place and just not wanting to move forward, and I was scared of moving forward. I felt like I wasn't capable of that. Man, the only thing I would tell myself is that I am capable of making it, and that I can do it. That things will be okay. Give me butter. Question: have you considered playing the critically acclaimed MMORPG Final Fantasy XIV Online with an expanded free trial where you can play through the entirety of A Realm Reborn in the award-winning Shadowbringers expansion up to level 80 with no restrictions on playtime? No. But listen, you do not need me playing an MMO game like that. I would never be able to get stuff done. I already have a hard time focusing. You do not need me focusing on something that's going to take away from my work and getting back into a good schedule, man. That's not going to be good for any of us. Kiang asks, is there anything you'd like to share about your approach to comics or art in general? So when it comes to comics, I do it more like the Marvel method, which is kind of, ironically enough, is kind of controversial from Marvel itself, because back in the day, the whole idea of it is that the writers would basically give a summary of the story, and the artists themselves would basically just take that summary and just create the pages. Now, this can work great if you are both the writer and the artist because you can handle everything essentially. But the problem is that a lot of the times the artists were technically the writers, but they weren't getting paid for them being writers essentially. There was a little bit of controversy around that whole method where it just didn't work out as well as they thought it would, and it only works as well as it can if the team knows each other pretty well. So really, it only works if you are both the writer and the artist, or you are totally in sync with like your artist and writer buddy, and you're both collaborating on the story. But if it becomes like, oh, you're the writer, quote unquote, and you make a summary, but the artist is literally doing all the heavy lifting of the plot, like taking the plot more than just a summary and all that stuff, that becomes a problem. It becomes lopsided, especially if you don't credit the writer, you don't credit the artist for being the writer. Whoops. But, it's one of those things. But that's how I do my comic creation. Also, like early on, I was not doing any scripts. That's probably going to give people conniptions that I didn't do any scripts early on. That might have been the source of a lot of my problems, is that I didn't do a whole lot of scripts. I would like write pieces of dialogue I would want, and I would write down like what moments I would want for the series, or like sketch out moments that I was wanting to put into the series. And I still did thumbnailing and things like that, but I basically had a summary of what I wanted the episode to be and just drew it page by page. And it was great for certain things. Like if I felt like an idea wasn't working as well as it anymore, I was able to easily restructure essentially. And I think that's a better ability for artists to have. I'm not saying don't do scripts. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is it's much better to be able to reorganize and improvise than just always planning out things ahead. Again, you want to be able to like have a good structure and plan things out. But if you're not able to pick up the pieces if plans go awry, that's a problem. Oda's said this time and time again. A lot of people think that he planned everything in one piece from the beginning, but no, there's been times where like Oda didn't have plans for certain things, but ended up improvising pretty well with them. I think one of the most recent examples has been the Elbaf arc. Like that was apparently originally was never supposed to take place, and now it's like, oh my god, this wasn't supposed to be in place, but it feels like so natural for the most part. Like it's so good so far, and like you can't imagine the story without this arc. And another thing, like a much earlier example would be the supernova. Like originally it wasn't supposed to be that many other pirates that made it over to the new world. It was supposed to be, I think it was only just Kid at the time that like he wanted there to be with like the Straw Hats and such, like the Kid's crew. But then I think it was like one of the editors telling him, oh, you should add more characters. And essentially he added up more of these supernova and stuff. And then they went on to play more integral parts into the story. And then again, it's like, oh man, I can't imagine the story without these guys. That's how you should be as like a writer. It's like you should be able to make sure that things are planned out and have a good structure ready to go, but you need to be ready to reorganize and pick up the pieces. You don't want to be so rigid in your plans that you can't pick up the pieces, but you also don't want to be too by the seat of your pants, because both extremes are not good for story creation. You got to have a good balance of both. That's also, again, why you need to be good at doing a lot of one-shots early on so you can get used to the formula. You don't want to do your big projects immediately. You got to get good. You got to build up to that, As for art itself, I very much based off of try to do things based off of like a visual flow type of standpoint. I want to make sure that I'm able to make people's eyes follow the piece pretty well, but more so like I use shapes a lot when it comes to creating art. Essentially, I find that that's helped me a lot understand how to draw a lot of dynamic poses and a lot of like foreshortened poses and things like that. Like stuff like Imaishi would draw back in like not just back in the 2000s, but just in general. That dude does crazy posing, but essentially it was just based off of that, and also wanting to do more of that heavy shading because you didn't really see it a whole lot. You saw it a lot in the 2000s, but then it kind of faded away. But like artists like Mike Mignola and Imaishi were masters of using that heavy shaded art, in my opinion. I wanted to put that into my artwork, and it took a lot of time to get there because it is deceptively simple, because you think you have an understanding of it, but no, you have to have a very good firm understanding of how lighting and shadows work in order to do that heavy shading. Honestly, sometimes I need to get back to just doing some practice here and there on just regular lighting and shading and doing like regular cell shading, because again, it's deceptively simple, because you think it's just as easy as just like, oh, I'm just going to shade where I would normally shape, but it's just going to be a heavy black. But no, you can't necessarily do that. There's a lot more of a rhythm to it than you think. There's a lot more of a methodology to it than you think in order to make sure that the silhouette looks good of the character and that the shape is still understandable and that parts still make sense. It's all there. It's deceptively simple. But it was fun to like get to that point and try to do that. But yeah, like I said, the big thing for me is like trying to make sure that our pieces have a very nice visual flow and are very dynamic. And so for me, using shapes and like hard shadows to create that visual flow is very important in the process I do. So yeah. Briggs asks, are most of your other comics besides Unbreakable Iron Ranger World dead? Haven't heard any other info. So I said it earlier, but I still want to work on things like Daisy Eternal and Maximum Spider-Man, but I want to focus more on my original work. That doesn't mean that those things are dead. It's just I want to find a way to better funnel people into my original works. Because I will say, it's difficult sometimes working on Daisy Eternal and Maximum Spider-Man because, number one, I'll be honest, but Daisy Eternal was hard for me to like keep consistently making slice of life content for that because I didn't know what to do that would make sense with Doom. Not because I didn't like Doom. I love Doom. But I was just genuinely worried because there wasn't really a whole lot of that slice of life content that you'd see in Doom, at least when I was getting into more the fandom type of things. I was kind of worried of like, okay, well, what's the stuff that I can do? What stuff that people would like? Because I was just worried. I didn't want to do anything too stupid or too cliche, as it were. I just wanted to have a fun comic, but like I said, it was just kind of difficult. I don't know, but like I do want to bring it back. I'm still planning to like do like this little slight revival to it. Not where I'm like redoing everything, but like just bringing it back, re-uploading pages and like touching up the art and just seeing where it goes from there and seeing if I get any more ideas. But at least try to get people's attention back on and see if they still want more of it, that type of thing. As for Maximum Spider-Man, I've had a struggle because like I want to work on more stuff, but I really want to work on more full episodes, but then that takes time away from my original work. At least with Daisy Eternal, it's like I'm working on like maybe like 1 or 2 pages, but with Max Spider-Man, I have that drive and desire to want to do more, like full fleshed out issues, but that conflicts with like trying to do more of my original stuff, which is basically would take the same equal amount of time. I'll see if I could do more like mini pages and stuff and do like bring back some concept art and like those kind of drawings, but like I don't know. For me, it's like either I go fully all the way or I don't do anything with it, It's kind of like that weird ultimatum type of thing, But yeah, they're not dead. They're just currently being reworked on. But yeah, that's about it for today. Those are today's questions. Thank you guys so much for joining today, and I hope you're excited for the next couple episodes. Next episode's going to be about the first episode of The Wolf of New Orleans. Then episode 3 is going to be about episode 2 of Unbreakable Iron Ranger. I hope you enjoy those episodes when they come out. Thank you guys so much for listening, and God bless.